there is a fundamental misunderstanding about what it means to be unstoppable. We look at people who operate at the absolute pinnacle of their potential, the ones who seem immune to burnout, doubt, and chaos, and we assume they possess some rare genetic endurance. We think they woke up one day with an infinite reservoir of motivation. They didn't. If you look closely at human biology and psychology, greatness is never born from a sudden burst of lightning strike intensity. It is built through an understanding of why we move forward when the ground gives out beneath us. Most people try to build success by focusing entirely on the what and the how. They chase tactics, hacks, and external outcomes. But when the environment shifts or when things get hard, those tactics fail. Why? Because tactics don't survive adversity. A clear sense of direction and a deep-rooted internal standard do. To become the best version of yourself, you have to stop asking how to do more and start understanding why your growth matters to the people around you and to the standard you hold for your own life. Think about the physiology of momentum. When you push a heavy flywheel, the first 100 rotations take massive, exhausting effort. Nothing seems to be happening. The friction is high and the return on investment looks invisible. Most people quit right there. They evaluate their long-term potential based on short-term friction. Being unstoppable isn't about running faster. It's about refusing to stop pushing against that friction until the momentum takes over. It's the realization that progress is a compounding game. Every small, disciplined choice you make when no one is watching is an investment in a future version of you that hasn't arrived yet. When you align your daily actions with a clear, unbreakable standard, fear loses its leverage. Doubt still shows up, but it gets a vote in your decisions. You stop competing with everyone else in the room and start competing exclusively with the person you were yesterday. That is the entire secret. You don't become unstoppable by conquering the world. You become unstoppable by conquering the friction between who you are right now and who you know you are capable of becoming. Feck keynotes of the speech, the fallacy of intensity, true growth does not come from short-term bursts of motivation, but from consistent compounding actions built over time. The power of the why tactics and surface level hacks fail during hardship. Enduring progress requires a deep internal standard and clear sense of direction. Overcoming the friction phase like a heavy flywheel, early efforts yield invisible results, requiring resilience to push past initial resistance before momentum takes over. Internal vs. external competition. Sustainable success is achieved by eliminating outside comparisons and focusing entirely on outperforming your past self. The definition of being unstoppable, true unstoppable momentum is not the absence of doubt or fear, but the absolute refusal to let those feelings dictate your daily actions. There is a profound and dangerous illusion that permeates modern culture, whispering the lie that greatness is born from dramatic explosions of intensity. We watch films, read biographies, and consume highlight reels that glorify the light and strike moment, the all-nighter that birthed a company, the grueling 3-month transformation that shocked a community, or the sudden burst of inspiration that produced a masterpiece. Because we are conditioned by these surface-level narratives, we begin to believe that success is a matter of sheer willpower, of summoning a Herculean effort on demand, and forcing the universe to bend to our will through brute force alone. We wait for motivation to strike. We wait to feel like working, to feel inspired, to feel confident, or to feel ready. And when those feelings fail to materialize, as they inevitably do, we freeze. We assume that because we do not possess an infinite reservoir of raw, explosive energy, we are somehow broken, unequipped, or disdained for mediocrity. This is the single greatest trap of the modern achiever. The truth hidden quietly beneath the noise of our fast-paced society is that true growth does not come from short-term bursts of motivation at all. It comes from the unglamorous, relentless, and compounding power of consistency built brick by quiet brick over time. To understand why intensity fails us, we only have to look at human biology and psychology. Intensity is an emotional state. It is fueled by adrenaline, novelty, and high arousal. When you are fired up by a new idea or a motivational speech, your brain floods with chemicals that make hard work feel effortless. You feel invincible. You commit to waking up at 5 in the morning, working out for 2 hours, reading 50 pages a day, and overhauling your entire diet overnight. You declare to the world that everything is changing. But adrenaline has an expiration date. It is a biological impossibility for the human body to sustain high-intensity arousal over long periods. The nervous system requires homeostasis. When the initial chemical rush fades, which usually happens within a few days or weeks, you are left face to face with the cold, unyielding reality of the work. The alarm goes off in the dark, the bed is warm, the task is tedious, and the adrenaline is completely gone. Because your entire strategy relied on that emotional high, you crash. You miss a day, then you feel guilty, miss a second day, and abandon the project entirely. Intensity burns hot, but it burns fast, leaving behind nothing more than a pile of ashes and a reinforced belief that you lack discipline. In stark contrast, consistency is not an emotion, it is an operating system. It does not care how you feel when you wake up. It does not negotiate with your mood, your weather, or your level of inspiration. Consistency recognizes that progress is not a sprint fueled by passion, but a slow, heavy march fueled by habit. When you commit to consistency, you stop asking yourself whether you want to do the work, and you start accepting that the work simply is what you do. Consider the metaphor of physical fitness. If a person goes to the gym once a month and works out with absolute eye-bulging, earth-shattering intensity for 6 hours straight, they will not get stronger. In fact, they will likely injure themselves, suffer from debilitating muscle soreness, and quit out of sheer exhaustion. Their body undergoes a traumatic shock rather than a progressive adaptation. However, if that same person goes to the gym 4 times a week for just 45 minutes, lifting moderate weights with disciplined form, nothing dramatic happens on day 1. Nothing dramatic happens on day 10. But over the course of 12 months, their entire physiological structure transforms. The muscle fibers micro, tear, and rebuild stronger, bone density increases, metabolic pathways optimize, and a completely new physical reality is forged. That is the compounding effect in action. Small, seemingly insignificant inputs repeated with relentless regularity accumulate into exponential outputs. This principle applies to every single domain of human endeavor, whether you are building a business, mastering an instrument, writing a book, or redesigning your mindset. The human brain is a marvel of neuroplasticity, yet it resists rapid, forced rewiring. It changes through repetition. Every time you perform a small, disciplined action, you are physically reinforcing a neural pathway. You are laying down insulation around a wire, making the signal faster, clearer, and more automatic next time. When you rely on intensity, you are trying to force electricity through unbuilt infrastructure, creating massive friction and short circuits. When you rely on consistency, you are building the infrastructure slowly, allowing the current to flow naturally and effortlessly over time. This is why people who are fiercely talented often lose out to people who are merely persistent. Talent and intensity are gifts of potential, but consistency is the crucible in which potential is refined into actualized capability. The person who writes 500 words every single day, regardless of inspiration, will finish a book long before the genius who waits for the muses to align and writes 10,000 words in a feverish, sleep-deprived weekend that they never repeat. Embracing the power of compounding requires a fundamental shift in how you measure success. We live in a culture obsessed with immediate feedback. We want our inputs to match our outputs instantly. If we go to the gym once, we want to see muscle definition. If we post one good video or write one good page, we want the world to applaud. When the universe remains silent, our instant gratification loop panics, and we assume our efforts are failing. We must learn to divorce our daily actions from immediate validation. Imagine putting a single penny into a savings account and doubling it every day for a month. On day 1, you have 1 cent. On day 10, you have about $5. Even by day 20, you have just over $5,000, a nice sum, but hardly life-changing given the immense effort of 20 days of compounding. But watch what happens in the final days. By day 31, that single penny explodes into over $10 million. The vast majority of the growth happens in the final stretch, built entirely on the foundation of the invisible, seemingly pointless days at the beginning. Most people quit on day 18 because they cannot see the horizon. They judge their long-term potential based on short-term friction. They fail to realize that greatness is not achieved in the explosive finale, but in the quiet, mundane, uncelebrated middle where you show up and do the work when nobody is watching, when nobody is clapping, and when you don't even feel like doing it. By letting go the desperate need for intense cinematic breakthroughs and surrendering to the quiet power of steady, compounding consistency, you stop fighting against human nature and start working with it, transforming your daily habits into an unstoppable force that quietly reshapes your entire destiny over time. There is a profound and widespread illusion that success can be systematically engineered through an endless accumulation of tactics, strategies, and external hacks. We live in an era overflowing with shortcuts, blueprint guides, and productivity frameworks designed to give us the edge, to save us time, and to fast-track our journey to the top. We consume information voraciously, collecting tips on how to manage our calendars, how to optimize our workflows, how to manipulate algorithms, and how to say no to distractions. We treat our lives like complex engineering problems that can be solved if we just find the right combination of tools. But there is a fatal flaw in this approach that reveals itself the exact moment a genuine crisis hits. When the market shifts, when a project collapses, when a personal tragedy strikes, or when the sheer weight of sustained adversity bears down upon us, all of those clever tactics and surface-level hacks completely shatter. They evaporate into thin air when they're needed most. Why do they fail? Because tactics are built for stable environments. They are superficial instruments designed to navigate smooth seas, and they possess zero structural integrity when the storm arrives. When you build your life entirely on the foundation of what to do and how to do it, you leave yourself entirely defenseless against the unpredictable chaos of human existence. Because knowing the mechanics of a process is vastly different from possessing the anchor required to survive the turbulence of executing it. To understand why tactics crumble under pressure, we must examine the fundamental psychological architecture of human motivation and endurance. Human beings are not machines fueled by code and efficiency protocols. We are biological organisms driven by meaning, narrative, and core conviction. When you rely solely on a tactical approach, your daily actions are disconnected from any deeper anchor. You are simply checking boxes on a list because an influencer, a book, or a manager told you that this is the correct sequence of steps to reach a goal. But when the friction increases, when the work becomes painful, when the financial returns dry up, when the recognition fails to materialize, or when exhaustion sets deep into your bones, your brain begins to conduct a ruthless cost-benefit analysis. It looks at the endless list of tactics and asks a very logical question: why am I suffering through this? If your only answer is a tactical one, such as because this is the optimal productivity routine, your brain will immediately conclude that the immediate relief of quitting outweighs the abstract, sterile benefit of the tactic. The tactical framework offers no emotional resilience, no moral fortitude, and no transcendent purpose to justify the pain of endurance. It gives you a roadmap without giving you a destination worth bleeding for, and when the road gets rough, you turn around. This is precisely why enduring progress requires something infinitely deeper, more primitive, and more resilient than a strategy. It requires a rock, solid internal standard and a clear, unwavering sense of direction. When we talk about a sense of direction, we are not talking about a rigid 5-year career plan or a generic mission statement printed on a corporate wall. We are talking about an internal compass that defines who you are, what you stand for, and why your existence matters to the ecosystem around you. It is the deep, psychological clarity of knowing your core principles so thoroughly that they guide your decisions even when no one is watching and even when the consequences are severe. Coupled with this direction is an internal standard, a personal baseline of excellence and integrity that you refuse to compromise regardless of external circumstances. When you operate from an internal standard, you stop asking whether a task is convenient, whether people are applauding your efforts, or whether there is an easier shortcut available. You do the work because it aligns with who you claim to be. If your standard is to show up with absolute honesty and craftsmanship, then cutting corners becomes physically repulsive to your psychological identity, no matter how much time a shortcut might save you. Consider the stark difference between a person who is driven by tactics and a person who is anchored by a deep sense of direction when facing a monumental setback. The tactical thinker, upon experiencing a catastrophic failure, views the failure as an invalidation of their method. They scramble to find a new tactic, a new guru, or a new software, bouncing frantically from one shiny object to another in a desperate attempt to regain control. They are tossed about by every gust of wind because they have no ballast. Conversely, the individual anchored by a deep internal standard and a clear sense of direction views failure through an entirely different lens. They understand that tactics are merely variable tools, but their mission and their standard are immutable. When a specific method fails, they do not question their core purpose. They simply discard the broken tool, adjust their approach, and keep marching forward. The direction remains fixed, even if the path bends. This psychological fortitude is what separates the people who permanently alter their industries from the ones who burn out after the first major obstacle. The world does not ultimately belong to the cleverest tacticians. It belongs to the deeply committed who refuse to drift from their anchor when the waters turn violent. Building this internal standard and clarifying your direction is not a comfortable process. It requires deep, often painful introspection. It forces you to strip away the expectations of society, the applause of strangers, and the hollow metrics of modern achievement to discover what you actually care about at your core. It demands that you stop outsourcing your values to the latest productivity trends and start defining your own rules of engagement. When you finally anchor yourself to a profound sense of purpose and an uncompromising internal standard, a remarkable psychological shift occurs. The anxiety of uncertainty begins to dissolve. You realize that while you cannot control the chaos of the external world, the shifting algorithms, the unpredictable economy, or the opinions of others, you have absolute dominion over the internal bar you set for yourself each day. You no longer need external motivation to push you because your daily actions are now an authentic expression of your identity. You stop chasing fleeting hacks and start building a lasting legacy. By trading the fragile illusion of superficial tactics for the unyielding strength of an internal standard and a clear direction, you equip yourself with the endurance required to weather any storm, outlast any temporary failure, and ultimately transform your deepest potential into an undeniable reality. There is a quiet, deceptive illusion that haunts the beginning of every worthwhile endeavor, whispering the false promise that progress should feel natural, fluid, and immediately rewarding. When we set out to build a new life, launch a project, master a craft, or break an old habit, we approach the starting line with a surge of enthusiasm, expecting the path ahead to open smoothly before us. We assume that because our intentions are pure and our motivation is high, the universe will cooperate and our daily actions will translate directly into visible, satisfying results. But reality operates under a completely different set of laws. The moment you push against the status quo, the moment you attempt to move your life from a state of stagnant comfort into a state of dynamic growth, you run headfirst into a massive invisible wall of resistance. This resistance is not a sign that you are failing, and it is not a cosmic warning telling you to turn back. It is the fundamental tax of transformation. It is the friction phase, and it catches almost every ambitious person completely off guard, destroying their momentum before it ever has a chance to catch fire. To truly understand the nature of this resistance, we can look at the mechanical equivalent of human momentum, the massive, heavy industrial flywheel. Imagine a giant, thick, solid steel wheel weighing thousands of pounds, resting completely still on a central axle. Your goal is to get this enormous mass spinning so fast that it becomes a self-sustaining powerhouse. You walk up to it on day one, place your hands against the cold metal, and push with all your might. You strain your muscles, sweat pours down your face, and you give it everything you have. When you step back and look, the flywheel has barely budged. It has moved perhaps a fraction of an inch. The return on investment for your immense physical output looks entirely invisible. Frustrated, you come back the next day and push just as hard. Again, almost nothing happens. To an outside observer or to your own doubting mind, your efforts look completely pointless. You are exerting maximum energy for zero apparent reward. This is the exact moment where the vast majority of people surrender. They evaluate their long-term potential based on the short-term friction of the opening phase. They mistake the lack of immediate visible output for a lack of progress, concluding that because the wheel isn't spinning yet, they lack the strength or the talent to make it move, and they walk away forever. What these quitters fail to understand is that the early stage of any profound change is entirely about absorbing and overcoming static friction, not about achieving visible velocity. Every single push you make against that stationary heavy wheel is doing vital, unseen work. It is building calusas on your hands, strengthening your core, and storing kinetic energy into the mass itself, even if the eye cannot perceive it. On day 10, the wheel might still feel just as heavy. On day 30, it might still refuse to spin freely. But every single rotation, no matter how agonizingly slow, is compounding. The physics of momentum dictate that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It is being accumulated. If you keep your hands on the metal and keep pushing through the burning muscles, the mind-numbing boredom, and the deafening silence of a world that refuses to applaud your early efforts, a shift finally occurs. The resistance begins to soften. The friction coefficient drops. Suddenly, on a random Tuesday, when you feel no more inspired than you did on day one, the massive wheel gives a noticeable shudder, completes a full rotation under its own power, and begins to turn. From that exact turning point forward, the dynamic of the entire endeavor flips completely on its head. You no longer have to strain with every ounce of your being just to prevent the wheel from rolling backward. The accumulated mass of the flywheel begins to work for you, storing and carrying its own momentum. It takes over the heavy lifting, crushing obstacles in its path simply because of the sheer kinetic energy it has built up over months or years of uncelebrated, grinding consistency. The secret that separates those who achieve greatness from those who remain trapped in perpetual starting over loops is simply the willingness to endure the invisible phase without demanding immediate validation. They do not quit during the friction phase because they understand that the invisibility of results does not mean the absence of progress. They accept that the heaviest lifting always happens when nobody is watching, when the rewards are entirely hidden, and when the resistance is pushing back with maximum hostility. When you internalize this reality, your entire psychological relationship with struggle transforms. Instead of panicking when things feel hard, tedious, or stubbornly stagnant, you recognize that high friction is the unmistakable proof that you are finally engaging with something heavy enough to change your life. You stop looking for hacks to bypass the resistance, because you realize that the resistance itself is what builds the strength required to sustain success. You stop measuring your worth by how fast the world notices your efforts, and you start measuring your discipline by how stubbornly you keep pushing against the stationary wall when every instinct tells you to let go. By embracing the grueling reality of the early friction phase and refusing to stop until the kinetic energy of your habits takes over, you cross the invisible threshold from struggle into unstoppable momentum. Watching in awe as the very mass that once tried to crush you becomes the unstoppable engine of your ultimate evolution. There is a quiet, pervasive trap that quietly sabotages almost every ambitious person at some point in their journey, draining their energy and distorting their sense of self, worth the psychological poison of external comparison. From the moment we enter the modern world, we are conditioned to view life as a crowded stadium filled with competitors, a grand leaderboard where everyone is ranked against everyone else. We watch our peers, our rivals, and even total strangers on digital platforms, measuring our behind the scenes struggles against their carefully curated highlight reels. We look at someone else's chapter 20 and compare it miserably to our own chapter 2, panicking because we are not moving as fast, earning as much, or receiving the same level of applause. This constant lateral gazing creates a state of chronic psychological anxiety. It forces us to adopt metrics of success that do not belong to us, chasing goals we never actually chose simply because someone else crossed that finish line first. When you measure your progress by looking at what the person to your left or your right is doing, you surrender control of your own compass. You become reactive, defensive, and perpetually exhausted, running a race that has no defined course, no authentic finish line, and no personal meaning. To break free from this destructive cycle, you must undergo a radical paradigm shift, recognizing that sustainable success is never achieved by looking outward, but by looking entirely inward. The fundamental truth of human potential is that you are not running against the thousands of other people in your industry, your classroom, or your social circle. You are running an isolated, deeply personal race against the only opponent that truly matters, the person you were yesterday. When you truly internalize this reality, the entire landscape of your ambition changes overnight. The noise of the crowd begins to fade into the background, and the desperate need for external validation loses its grip on your mind. You stop asking whether you are beating your neighbor, whether your metrics are higher than your competitors, or whether the public is applauding your pace. Instead, you begin to ask a much sharper, more honest question: am I executing at a higher level of discipline, integrity, and focus today than I was a week ago, a month ago, or a year ago? This shift from horizontal comparison to vertical self-competition is the cornerstone of lifelong mastery. It transforms ambition from a stressful, anxiety-driven scramble into a calm, focused, and deeply satisfying pursuit of personal evolution. Consider the mechanics of how human beings actually improve over time. A world-class Olympic runner does not stare at the lanes beside them while sprinting a 100-meter dash. Doing so alters their body mechanics, breaks their aerodynamic form, and slows them down. They keep their eyes locked firmly on the track ahead, entirely absorbed in perfecting their own stride, their own breathing, and their own explosive power. They study their own previous race times, analyzing where their technique broke down and where they can shave off milliseconds of their personal record. They compete against the ghost of their past performance, not the flesh and blood athletes running in the adjacent lanes. When you apply this exact mindset to your daily life, your entire relationship with failure transforms. If you see someone else succeed faster than you, you no longer experience it as a personal indictment of your own worth or a sign that you are falling behind. You see it simply as data, proof of what is possible within human capacity, while remaining entirely unshakable in your commitment to your own unique timeline. Your progress becomes insulated from the opinions, successes, and failures of the outside world because your standard is no longer defined by public consensus. Embracing this principle requires immense courage because society loves a comparison game and constantly tempts us to re-enter the arena of external validation. Every notification, every public ranking, and every cultural milestone whispers that your value is tied to how you stack up against the crowd. Resisting this pressure means getting comfortable with running in relative obscurity. It means accepting that your journey might look different, slower, or more unconventional than the paths of those around you and being completely at peace with that reality. When you eliminate outside comparisons, you free up a massive amount of cognitive and emotional bandwidth that was previously wasted on jealousy, intimidation, and performative achievement. You redirect that vital energy back into your own craft, your own habits, and your own daily execution. You realize that the only true tragedy is not finishing behind someone else, but failing to unlock the full depth of your own capability because you were too busy looking sideways to notice the path beneath your own feet. By anchoring your identity entirely and outperforming your past self, you step off the exhausting treadmill of external competition and enter a state of quiet, unstoppable momentum where your growth is entirely self-sustaining, deeply authentic, and completely immune to the turbulence of the world around you. There's a profound misconception embedded in how modern culture defines strength, victory, and peak performance. We have been conditioned to believe that becoming unstoppable is a magical destination, a permanent psychological summit where the air is clear, the sun always shines, and the ghosts of doubt and fear are permanently vanquished. We look at individuals who operate at the highest levels of their craft, the leaders, creators, innovators, and masters who seem to glide through chaos with unnerving calm, and we assume they possess some rare neurological wiring that completely shields them from anxiety, hesitation, and fear. We wait for the day when we will finally feel completely confident, entirely fearless, and bulletproof against insecurity before we take our biggest leaps. This is a catastrophic misunderstanding of human psychology. Fear and doubt are not flaws in the system. They are core features of the human operating system. They are the evolutionary alarms designed to keep us safe in an uncertain world. The difference between the person who remains paralyzed by their anxieties and the person who achieves legendary status is not the absence of fear. The master feels the exact same knot in the stomach, the exact same whisper of imposter syndrome, and the exact same paralyzing flash of doubt that the novice feels. The entire secret, the singular pivot point upon which greatness turns, lies in the absolute refusal to let those feelings cast a single vote in the direction of your actions. To understand the mechanics of this psychological freedom, we must examine how emotions interact with agency. Most people operate under the belief that feelings must precede action. They believe that they need to feel motivated before they can work, feel confident before they can speak, and feel fearless before they can take a risk. This emotional dependency is a trap of monumental proportions because emotions are notoriously fickle, volatile, and resistant to direct command. If you wait until you feel like doing something difficult, you will wait forever. Being unstoppable begins the moment you shatter this illusion and accept a radical truth. You do not need to wait for permission from your feelings to act. You can experience a wave of intense fear, your heart can hammer against your ribs, your mind can scream warnings about potential failure, and you can still take a deliberate step forward anyway. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the absolute mastery of it. It is the conscious acknowledgement that terror and execution can coexist in the same body at the exact same moment. When you separate your emotional state from your behavioral output, fear loses its primary weapon against you. It ceases to be a command and is reduced to mere background noise, a passenger screaming in the back seat, while you keep both hands firmly on the steering wheel and your eyes locked on the road ahead. Consider what happens when you strip fear and doubt of their voting power. For most of your life, whenever hesitation arose, it was granted an immediate veto over your ambitions. A great idea would strike, doubt would whisper that you might look foolish, and instantly your brain would cancel the project. An opportunity for growth would present itself, fear would remind you of past failures, and you would retreat into the safe, comforting embrace of the status quo. You treated your internal anxieties as objective truths about your capability. But when you adopt the mindset of an unstoppable force, your internal dialogue undergoes a profound revolution. When doubt shows up, and make no mistake, it will always show up, you do not fight it, suppress it, or pretend it isn't there. Suppression only gives fear more power. Instead, you acknowledge its presence with cold detachment. You say to yourself, of course I'm afraid, this matters to me and the stakes are high. And then, without missing a beat, you execute the task anyway. You let the fear tag along for the ride. You act in spite of it. Over time, this repeated behavior rewires your nervous system. The brain realizes that the catastrophic outcomes predicted by your anxieties rarely materialize, and even when they do, you survive them. The grip of fear begins to weaken, not because it stopped showing up, but because it learned that it no longer has any control over your choices. This dynamic transforms your relationship with the unknown and shields you from the paralysis of overthinking. The greatest thief of human potential is not failure itself. It is the agonizing anticipation of failure, the endless mental rehearsal of worst-case scenarios that keeps people frozen at the starting line for decades. When you realize that you do not need to feel fearless to move, the paralyzing weight of perfectionism evaporates. You stop waiting for the stars to align, for the timing to be right, or for your confidence to miraculously catch up to your dreams. You understand that confidence is never a prerequisite for action, it is the direct byproduct of it. You do not become confident by sitting in a room thinking about success. You become confident by stepping into the arena, feeling terrified, executing poorly at first, and surviving to try again tomorrow. Every single time you take a decisive action while your knees are shaking, you deposit a massive brick of trust into the foundation of your own self-efficacy. You prove to your subconscious mind that your commitments are vastly louder and more powerful than your emotions. When this standard becomes your default operating system, you become truly unstoppable because nothing the external world or your internal chemistry can throw at you has the power to stop you from moving. Rejection cannot stop you because your self-worth is not tied to universal approval. Failure cannot stop you because you view setbacks merely as navigational data rather than moral indictments. And fear cannot stop you because you have uncoupled your actions from your moods. You walk through life with a quiet, unshakable resolve, carrying your doubts like a backpack rather than letting them anchor you to the ground. By refusing to give your fears a vote in your destiny, you reclaim absolute sovereignty over your life, turning every obstacle into fuel and transforming your highest potential into an inevitable reality. We have traced the anatomy of what it truly means to become unstoppable, stripping away the illusions, the hacks, and the comforting lies that keep so many people trapped in perpetual starting over loops. We now know that greatness is never born from the fragile, explosive spark of short-term intensity, but from the unglamorous, compounding power of consistency that builds quietly over time. We understand that tactics and productivity shortcuts will always shatter the moment a storm arrives, and that true endurance requires a rock-solid internal standard and a clear sense of direction that anchors you when the waters turn violent. We recognize that the grueling friction phase, the heavy, unrewarded push against a stationary world, is not a sign to quit, but the very crucible that stores the kinetic energy of our future momentum. We have learned to step off the exhausting treadmill of external comparison, trading the anxiety of lateral judgment for the quiet, focused power of outperforming our own past selves. And finally, we have seen that fear and doubt are never going to disappear, but that they lose all their leverage the moment we strip them of their vote and refuse to let them dictate our actions. The secret to becoming the best version of yourself was never hidden behind some complex, inaccessible door. It has been waiting quietly inside your daily choices all along. It lives in the decision to show up when you don't feel like it, to honor your internal standard when no one is watching, to push through the resistance when the results are invisible, and to take that terrifying next step with your knees shaking and your doubts tagging along behind you. The world does not need you to be